Minister, thank you so much for setting aside time to speak with me today. Minister, with total employment expanding in Q2 and we are now a month into the third quarter, do you see this momentum or trend continuing? And on that, are workers also seeing their wages rise to keep up with inflation?
We are seeing still quite promising signs of that momentum keeping up. Now, I think you can ostensibly appreciate the fact that we are at almost full employment compared to the pre-pandemic. So, like I was sharing earlier on when I released the advanced labor market release earlier on, we are at we're at about 99% of pre-COVID, which is 2019. So with that, there has now it's resulted in our resident employment situation to be very, very tight, meaning that today I think we are seeing in the months ahead, the next few quarters, a slowing down of resident employment figures, ostensibly because they are already employed. But what we will be seeing would be a rise in the non-resident employment rates, and I think that's essentially what we're going to be experiencing. The bulk of that increase will come from the hospitality part, so your and also in construction, in manufacturing, in retail. I think that in the financial services, the infocom, healthcare services, and so on, they continue to remain resilient. They continue to need to have to hire people because of the growth. The next half of the year, you will see a lot of events happening. F1, we've got quite a number of international world forum coming here, where Singapore is going to host a number of these fora. And as a result of that, you will need all these staff coming in. Now, in many of the sectors, for instance, like in construction, in manufacturing, even in the services part, these sector jobs, these sectoral jobs, actually they're harder to fill. The vacancies are harder to fill to begin with, even before the pandemic itself. So, because of the fact that they're harder to fill, especially by our local workforce, our resident workforce itself, then the only way to grow is to have non-resident workforce coming in to grow that particular segment. And hence, my earlier statement about the fact that the next few quarters, because we know that there's a demand, and companies are also feeding back to us to tell us that, hey, I think we're in a better state than your earlier projections and so on. So we are going to see that the need for them to hire intensify. But having said that, of course, I think we always have to temper all this optimism with a healthy dose of realism, because there is still quite a fair bit of uncertainties happening around the world, right? I mean, I think you know ostensibly that the Russia-Ukraine crisis is not going to end anytime soon. It appears to be quite protracted. You still have the Sino-US trade tensions. You face the threat of new COVID variants. And on top of that, we are also dealing with a very high inflation environment. So these are clouds, they are dark clouds. They're not even in the horizon. They are also here that we're dealing with contemporaneously. So hence, while businesses, they are optimistic and so on, but we are still, we are encouraged, obviously. We want to support them. But at the same time, we also want to make sure that we want to temper or manage those kind of optimism with a healthy dose of what's happening around us.
Yeah. Minister, you talked about the challenge of inflation, right? And then again, on the bit about wages, are you seeing, workers' wages rising for workers as well in the months ahead?
I think that it's inevitable. MTI has put growth, I think, at the lower end of the 3 to 5%, and I think you can see that even in terms of the inflationary pressures, we may not have peaked. So what all this translates into is that, and with that increase in terms of hiring and so on, there's been pressures in terms of hiring talent, both for local as well as foreign, and wages obviously would be subject to that upward movement. Now, this increase in terms of wages and asking wages and so on is not unique to Singapore. In fact, in many countries, not just within the region but globally, you'll find that many countries are now really putting out feelers and raising the bar in terms of hiring talent. I'm sure you have read, and I think you covered so well, right, that how in the UK, basically they are now opening up their doors to hire Singapore talent, Singapore degree holders and so on. And then you have New Zealand setting up booths here to hire our nurses and our healthcare professionals to their part. And I think there'll be more of these things happening. And in my trips, in my travel around the world, many people have told us that they like the reputation, the credibility of workers who worked in Singapore because they are more assured of the caliber. And as a result of that, they're also prepared to pay higher. So we are plugged into the world. We cannot afford to isolate and insulate ourselves from the rest of the world. So what's happening around the world in terms of uplifting of wages will directly have an impact on our people here as well. And talent, global talent, is one of those things that the entire world is competing for.
Minister, let's talk about the non-resident employment, which you mentioned earlier on as well. Now, the reopening of borders in April has meant that workers, particularly in construction and manufacturing, that they've been able to enter Singapore. Does this mean then the labour crunch in these industries has ended, or is going to end?
The labour crunch is progressively and sort of narrowing. What we are seeing now is a transition. The last 2 years has been difficult for everyone. Now, many of the non-resident workforce that has been based out of Singapore have not had the time to go back to their home countries, to the source countries, for breaks, for family bonding time and so on. And so they are taking the opportunity during this time of the easing of border restrictions for them to go back to reunite with their families, chill, relax, before coming back to work. So that transition is such that while there are new workers coming in, at the same time, the existing workers, some of them have gone back to go on home leave. So we expect that in the coming months, that crunch will ease, because once they finish their leave obligations, they come back. These are life passes. That means they have not given up their work pass, right? They've just taken home leave, and after that they will come back. So I think the labour crunch will certainly ease in the months coming ahead. But having said, really, if the only model that our businesses have is on depending on low cost labour, right? It is not a sustainable model. We have to up the ante in terms of productivity. We need to think out of the box in terms of innovation. We need to have at our disposal all means to supplement and complement our Singapore core with all these non-resident workforce. But at the same time, we also need to think of creative ways of using, whether it's through flexible work arrangements, bringing back, more mature workers into the workforce, or even women, who are sort of providing some form of caregiving responsibilities. Then I think it is a sustainable model. And also to sort of think about not just having everyone to come in and have a plug and play, but to have some sort of slack in your system, right? To allow them to plug, to train, and then to play. I think those are broad things that we have repeated many times. I have come from a business background myself before. I know how tough it is in terms of maintaining those margins, but that is the only sustainable way that we have going forward as an economy.
Minister, we saw job vacancies hitting a record high in the first quarter. But given the uncertain economic outlook, both here and globally, you mentioned that as well, the Russia-Ukraine war and so on and so forth. Will companies think twice about adding to their headcount for the rest of the year?
Thus far, there are four very broad sectors that are still growing. Financial services, the ICT, Infocom technology, professional services, and healthcare. I think, in a way, particularly for healthcare, which I'm very familiar with, I think with a rapidly aging population, with the fact that the demand for good medical care, it's not just going to be for Singaporeans alone, but for the entire region. I think that notwithstanding crisis and layoffs and so on, I think it's going to continue to need to grow the manpower that's needed to fill these roles. Now, having said that, I think that thus far, what I'm hearing from the construction and the manufacturing line is that indeed there are in the sectors that we've chosen to be in for the manufacturing, particularly in the semiconductors, in the advanced manufacturing and so on. I think there is also a demand for IT infrastructure, IT systems, electric vehicles, sustainability in the form of people going online and all that. So I think that in all of these industries that we have actually been very long on, I think it will continue to grow. Retrenchments have hit an all-time low. They've gone to numbers that we have not seen. I was saying one of the set of statistics since 2015. Companies are sort of telling us that they are still hiring in the next few quarters, and I think you can see that earlier on from quite a number of questions from your colleagues, how tight the labour market situation is. I think we can sort of safely say for the rest of the year, I think we're on a good trajectory. Now, beyond that, I think economic cycles and so on, our projection is that, given what we know today, is that there will be a slowdown. Whether we will, go into a recession, I think at this point in time, it is still out there. The risk is low, but we can never say never.
Minister, thank you so much again for the insights and perspectives and of course for your time today with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.